welcome to Ask Me Anything, a series from Security Magazine where security leaders answer your questions about the industry, from best practices for risk management to the ins and outs of their position. I'm your host, Madeline Lawver, Assistant Editor at Security. Today, I'm joined by Hector Erazo, an experienced retail security professional who has held asset protection and loss prevention roles at various retail enterprises, most recently in corporate security for Opportune, and including roles at Target, Walmart, and other big box retailers. Welcome, Hector.
Thank you, Madeline. Nice to be here.
Readers across our social media platforms have submitted a bunch of questions for you today, so let's get started. The first question that we have for you is, how has retail security evolved since you first entered the field over 2 decades ago?
Oh, well, it's evolved a lot. I think two things that come to mind is technology and diversity. So I began my career in security as a uniform guard for a small grocery chain about 24 years ago. So if you can imagine, 24 years ago, we had, the technology we were using was old, and I remember walking the sales floor, and the retail locations had two-way mirrors where you could look outside to see the activity taking place on the sales floor, and obviously the shoppers weren't aware that you were monitoring their behavior. We also had register tape, detail tape that contained all of the transactions for a day, right? So as cashiers were ringing up their transactions, they would give a receipt and the detail tape would stay in the cash register. So if there was a shortage the following day, we would need to go retrieve that detail tape, highlight no sales, highlight any type of transaction that matched that cash shortage, and try to piece together the cash shortage. Video back then was recorded on VHS cassettes, and there was a pretty labor-intensive manner that these tapes needed to be changed out throughout the day, labeled, and when a shortage took place, you needed to get lucky and hope that the video was captured, try to match it to that detailed tape, and the moons and the stars needed to align for you to really, conduct your investigations. A lot of the apprehensions that were made, you needed to take a photo of the subject, the evidence with Polaroid pictures, right? A lot of the listeners may not be familiar with these items, but when we contacted law enforcement, we would quickly complete our narratives via pencil and paper and submit that information with the reporting officer. So there was a lot of things that have changed. Now we have cameras with the ability of talking down features. So somebody remotely can identify something on camera and speak to the individual on the camera and give them instructions. So that's a way that technology has evolved. The registered detail tape scenario that I shared has been completely changed by exception-based reporting. Now you can see different types of reports, different types of analysis at your fingertips, and the video is no longer obviously in in a VHS cassette. It's all stored in the cloud. So I believe that technology has improved a lot of our working conditions in the security and investigative fields. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I mentioned, as far as diversity, I've seen an increase in women and people of color in security leadership positions. So back in 1999, when I first joined Kmart in Compton, California, I remember the district security manager, the district investigator, and the security manager were all white men. Today, minority representation in security leadership is a little bit more reflective of the local demographic, especially in urban cities, and that's a great thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure that that representation has played a huge role. And it's also interesting to hear you go into what technology security leaders used to have to work with versus now. We've come a long way from two-way mirrors, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Another question that we had submitted from a reader on LinkedIn was, name three things that are top of mind for retail security leaders.
One, I would say people. I think that the pandemic really took a toll on everyone's mental health, and I think security professionals and all employees in general are really being a little bit more selective on what type of work they're doing, making sure that they enjoy where they work and doing meaningful work. So I think that making sure that you're taking care of your people and your people are taking care of your customers is top of mind. And that is through engagement, making sure that you're taking care of your team members' mental health, that you have a robust employee assistance program. It's no longer about compensation. It's about really taking care of your employees and making sure that they love where they work. Number two, I would say organized retail crime is definitely top of mind. There's two actual efforts that the National Retail Federation is focusing on, currently. One is the Informed Consumers Act, which requires online marketplaces to verify the identity of high-volume third-party sellers to help curb the sale of stolen and counterfeit merchandise online. And then the second one is Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, and this one establishes a new organized retail crime coordination center that will help federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies better coordinate the effectively combat criminal activity. So these two are two things that are definitely top of mind, and they're something that, like I said, the National Retail Federation is really supporting. I encourage you guys to really get involved a little bit more with that. And the third thing is workplace violence. We've seen, again, due to the pandemic and just different challenges that employees are experiencing, we've seen a lot of domestic violence spilling over to the workplace. There's headlines of mass shootings. There's a lot armed robberies. We're doing business in really tough times, and I think workplace violence and a focus on mitigating some of these issues, making sure that there's training and awareness, and back to the employee assistance program, making sure that we're taking care of our employees is something that's top of mind. So I think those three things are definitely something that would resonate with your audience.
Definitely. It's interesting to hear how much of that focuses on the people side of security as well, making sure that not only are employees happy, but you can retain them for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
A question that we had that's kind of on the tech side of security, someone asked, how does technology such as AI or biometrics, other things as well, factor into retail security efforts?
Yeah. So with some of the examples I mentioned earlier, it definitely um, enhances our efforts. I believe that currently there's autonomous security robots that are being deployed in certain posts, security posts. There's also facial recognition, which can also enhance our efforts with organized retail crime. I think out of those two, the autonomous security robots has a little bit more of an advantage because with facial recognition, you're also dealing with that constant battle between security and privacy. So there's a lot of privacy issues that have been associated with facial recognition and just the way that technology can be abused or manipulated, obviously in the wrong hands. So, again, I think that technology is definitely a force multiplier in our efforts.
I'm curious, what implementations of like robots have you seen in different retail spaces?
It's limited, but what I have seen is there's been deployments of these autonomous security robots in parking lots, in certain malls, right? And I totally see the benefit of these, especially in roles during. And again, I'm thinking back to the olden days where you expected a guard to be parked in his vehicle during a graveyard shift and monitor a empty parking lot for 8 hours straight. The odds are this individual is being set up for failure inadvertently, right? Because they're going to fall asleep. They may not be as bright and energetic as needed. So I think that in these types of posts, an autonomous security robot can do great because they will definitely be monitoring the situation, depending on the capabilities that it entails. It may be taking video, it may be patrolling certain areas. So again, it's certain things that I think there's value in certain posts, and there's other posts where I totally believe that the human approach can be a benefit. And an example of that can be a human guard can add value to your customer service experience. A human guard can see one of your customers struggling to carry bags and say, "Hey, let me carry that for you," and carry it up a few flights of stairs, right? And now that customer leaves with a positive experience, not of just that guard, but of your overall brand. So again, I think there's um, good applications for the autonomous security robots. I'm excited about seeing more of that.
Yeah, it is exciting, and I like how you compare kind of the pros of both people and technology. It doesn't have to be one or the other, where a robot's not going to fall asleep necessarily, but a person can give that human touch.
Right. And just for clarification, not that guards are falling asleep out there,
Yeah.
but in my investigations, there have been some situations where, we needed to address some concerns.
I mean, yeah, security requires a lot from the entire team. I think that working together is definitely important. We had another question from a reader that was focused more on security strategy, and it's should security leaders focus more on deterrence prior to a theft or investigations after an incident? How do you navigate that balance?
Yeah, I think that one requires a balance of both. The correct answer ideally would be deterrence, by all means, deterrence. The problem that you will run into is the fact that if you're deterring a lot of activity, a lot of incidents, it's hard to quantify what you are deterring. There are ways of doing it, but it's a little bit harder. Now, in situations where you're conducting a lot of incident investigations, investigation resolutions, you're seen more as being more productive. So we fall into that situation where we label deterrence as a lack of productivity and investigation resolution as productivity. Um, and I know some listeners may disagree and may say, "Hey, well, what about the your annual inventory results? That would prove the deterrence piece of this." And there are so many factors. It's very complex, but the inventory results may not always show a favorable inventory when you are successfully deterring. And there may be situations where you have stores that are close to each other and they're cannibalizing each other for sales, right? And as we remember, shortage is a percentage of sales. So that's where you get your shrink results. So if your sales are being cannibalized by your own stores, that can have an adverse effect. And there's a wide variety of different situations or scenarios that can occur. But overall, I'd like to think that deterrence should be your go-to, but you should have a good, healthy balance to ensure that you are being productive, you are being able to show you and your team's value when incidents do take place.
That's really interesting. I think part of that deterrence and investigations question that I hadn't considered before that you brought up is proving value. And even though deterrence means less investigations, that doesn't necessarily mean a less secure facility.
Yeah, and oftentimes, they'll say that the squeaky wheel gets the oil or the crying baby gets the bottle, and it's similar in situations where the locations with highest shrink get the highest, the best and latest technology, or they'll get the team or the candidates that have a little bit more experience. So again, and reasonable minds can disagree on this, but I think that it, when you focus on deterrence, it is harder to prove like the value that you're bringing, and it can inadvertently, um, you know, portray as if you're not being productive when in reality that's the type of productivity that you should be having deterring it.
Our next question connects to this really well, so I wanted to get this in. A reader asked, how can security teams determine which locations are at or assets are most at risk for a security threat?
Yeah, so if it's a new location that they're going into, they can lean on historical data. You know, as humans, we're creatures of habit, and the odds are the items that have been targeted in the past few years are the items that will be targeted this year. So that's one approach. Now, as far as the specific location, I would recommend conducting risk assessments that they can help you identify the vulnerabilities. I also recommend security professionals to go out into the local neighborhood and visit the other stores in the immediate area. Oftentimes, criminals choose the path of less resistance. Right. So if you have a shop and a few shops down, there's another similar retailer, and they're protecting, their widgets more than you are, the odds are that the bad actors are going to come to your location to steal those widgets from you. So understanding not only the strategies that your corporate headquarters is deploying in your location, but also having that intuition of identifying what specific needs are required in your specific area can definitely be valuable. And just talking to the competitors, talking to your neighbors, you'll see what items are being um, targeted. And then another rule of thumb is if anything that's your top selling item will also be an item that the bad guys or the thieves are trying to target as well. So that's another way of thinking about it.
That's really interesting. And something you said about conducting risk assessments made me wonder, are there specific gaps you have seen a lot in your experience in retail security, or does every store kind of have their own thing to work on?
I have seen gaps, and I the way I explain this is there's a seasonality, especially after inventories, whether your organization has annual inventories or um, you know biannually or quarterly inventories, that it's almost a focus on deterring, and then preventing. I mean, I'm sorry, deterring, and then apprehending, right? And it can change depending on the leader, depending on the inventory and what method was previously being used. But I think that depending on what the neighboring surrounding businesses are also doing is something that should be considered. So the gap that I've noticed is that sometimes a strategy is changed without it being seen through completely. So with deterrence efforts, it may take a few um, inventory cycles to really see what can be implemented in addition to, right? Because when we say deterrence, it's a whole array of things, right? We need to make sure that we're leaning on employees. Like we've said before, security is everyone's job. So training and awareness, making sure that there's some form of incentive for employees to really report suspicious activity taking place. So deterrence sounds very simple, but it's very hard to do. And I think that um, making sure that whatever strategy you pick is not something that's alternating as quickly might be a safer approach. Now, you will need to react as needed depending on the circumstances, but I at least some situations that I've encountered, I think that we're switching back and forth a little bit too prematurely.
Yeah, I think that connects a lot to the balance you were touching on before, and you brought up a lot of really good points about what specifically goes into deterrence too. We had one more question for you today, which is what recent retail security trends do you anticipate in the coming year?
I think I might name a few. I think that oftentimes things need to get worse before it gets better. And unfortunately, I do see retail crimes increasing, stores continuing to close. I even believe organized retail crime groups will begin employing maybe ransomware or cyber attacks just because, with technology, even nefarious actors start trying to improve their skill sets as well. But I think the light at the end of the tunnel is that this will lead to stronger public and private partnerships, leading to effective laws against organized retail crime. I think a good example is in California is CalOrca and the partnership with the California Retailers Association. And there's a lot of great orcas out there. San Diego, there's a coalition of law enforcement and retailers, just to name a few. Um, Creative business models will emerge to ensure businesses stay profitable and competitive. And I think that, again, because we're remembering that sales is really the driver of minimizing shrink and shortage. I think that the more creative models of doing business that organizations employ will definitely help the battle against shrink and shortage. And then lastly, the convergence or cross-training of retail security and cybersecurity is something that I think is going to take place. And we've seen some of this with physical security, but I'm excited to follow that along. And I'm studying cybersecurity currently in an effort to sharpen the saw and be prepared for any type of issues that the future may bring.
And I think that connects really well to another trend you brought up, how businesses are testing out different models. I think a lot of retailers are shifting to an e-commerce model, or at least including that, and that makes a lot of sense to follow that thread.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree.
hmm Thank you so much for going into all that. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today, but thanks so much for joining us, Hector.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Ask Me Anything from Security Magazine. Remember to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter to submit your questions for a future AMA episode. Listen to or watch more of the Ask Me Anything series on LinkedIn Live, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or directly from our site, securitymagazine.com. Thanks for tuning in.